Actually, 10:11. I'm sorry. I went a minute over.
That's okay.
Thank you, Somi. So I just want, the goal of what we're doing here is to not only share with educators what the biotech industry is doing, and this is an industry that is growing, and there's tremendous opportunity. I can't tell you how many times our office has been contacted by companies that are looking to hire individuals, and sometimes it's really hard to find those individuals, and certainly they're looking for folks at the master's and PhD level, but that's not all. There's a lot of other opportunities out there for those with bachelor's and even associates, and so to really bring forth the awareness is really what we want to help you with, in the start. And then, through some of these exchanges, learn from yourselves and other educators, what can we do and how can we partner with, companies to really support you so that we make some meaningful advancements for yourselves and for Connecticut as a whole. That, in short, that's what we're looking to accomplish. So that being said, we put in the chat some reflection questions, and really it just starts by with an introduction. You've heard from myself, Joe, Christine, Somi, and Mike, but really feel free to get us started. And maybe I think there's only 8 of us. We don't need necessarily, I don't need to go by birthday. So I'm just gonna tell you what, I'll just start off by who's at the top of my screen. So Matt, if I may pick on you first, could you just introduce yourself to everyone, and we'll kind of go from Matt to Dr. No, to Portia, Jackie, etc.
Okay. So my name is Matt Tabor. I'm a high school science teacher at Coggins High School, which is in Durham, which is part of Regional School District 13. I am certified in physics, biology, and general science, and I do teach all of them, not actually at the same time, but pretty regularly. I'm a second career teacher. My first career was in bioscience, so I have a PhD in neuroscience, which Peter actually got at UBC back in the 90s.
Yeah. All right.
And then I worked in various places, but spent 12 years working at Bristol Myers in Wallingford. That's what brought me back to Connecticut. So I've been really interested since I transitioned into teaching into trying to bridge the connection between industry and academia to try and get some cross collaborations going. It's been a struggle for various reasons. My one reflection or question, I think, goes back to sort of the question I asked before, which is just clinical relevance. And that's something that I find really drives the high school kids. If they can understand we're looking for a cure for cancer, or we're looking for, how schizophrenia works or something like that, the closer you can make it real to them and clinical, then things really get exciting. And then, of course, the second part of it is recognizing that technology itself is often the limiting factor to answering the scientific questions, because that's something they really don't get as part of traditional science training. I think, it's all about figuring out the right hypothesis, but so much of science today is figuring out the right technology.
So maybe we'll put those two, maybe put those two things down, or make a note of those as we're going through introduction, so we can circle back. You just brought up 2 great points.
So if we may, Jackie, please.
Hi, I'm Jackie Cortelli. I teach at Conard High School in West Hartford, Connecticut. I teach math and computer science, both. I'm also the pre-K through 12 computer science curriculum specialist for the district. That's a new thing that just started this year, so I'm really excited about that. My background is also similar to Matt. I worked at Raytheon for the first 3 years upon graduating from University of Connecticut. I'm returned to education, and really I think a lot of the professional development I got at Raytheon has informed my instruction and helped me to really center around project-based instruction. I really like working with students while they're doing. That's my happiest thing. What I'm really looking for and shopping for are I'm constantly looking for ideas for labs, especially with computer science instruction, labs that I can do for my students, because I still teach three classes, but then also labs that I can teach to other teachers, and labs that I can bring pre-K through 12 to help students to understand, computer science and how it's connected to so many different disciplines, especially biology, as we're kind of seeing right here. And then I'm also very interested in how I can help teachers to understand those connections too. So thank you for doing this today. This is awesome.
Thank you. Our pleasure. All right. And after Jackie, I see Kim. Kim, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Lewis. I am a second grade teacher, so I feel way out of my realm right now with a lot of this, but I'm a second grade teacher at Charles H. Barrow STEM Academy in North Windham. We sit right in between UConn and Eastern. We do have a lot of partnerships with both of the universities in which students do come in and do a lot. Well, they don't come in anymore, but we have done a lot of work with the Eastern and UConn students in the various schools there, especially the School of Engineering. We are a fairly new school. We've been open for about 8 years. I've been in the Windham district for 20. So teaching has been my first career and my only career. But we are a K-8 school. And I guess I kind of see this presentation today as an example of the path that some of our students can take and interests that they can start to show at an early age, especially for me at the elementary level. I'm thinking, how is this going to apply to me and my students? And I see it more as a way of sparking that interest and starting to spark the connection, especially with our partnerships that we do have out here. And how do we get our students more interested to stay on that path and keep that momentum moving forward? I had a hand in starting our school 8 years ago. I've helped write the integrated curriculum that we do have, and it is constantly changing, which it is like a living, breathing type of document that we have, and it is always changing. Our school has been awarded ample opportunities for staff to participate in a lot of PD. We've sent staff off to do lots of presentations. We've had people come to our school to visit. And I know for me, I really want to start influencing my students at such a young age of there are some amazing things out there that you can do with science, technology, engineering, and math, especially, and I know this is going to sound cliche, but especially our young female students. I have an 8th grader who does attend my school, and as quirky as it sounds, she's fascinated with amusement park rides. So I'm always telling her that, that is a career that you could follow, a path that you could follow. And I saw Joe's presentation today as kind of a way of sparking students' interest in identifying patterns in science and some of the amazing things that you can do with some of the things that we teach, even at the elementary level. So at first I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to apply to me, but that was my takeaway from it, thus far. So thank you for that, Joe.
Thanks, Kim. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Is it Portia?
Yes,
okay.
You got it right. And Kim, I don't think you're being cliche. I think it's unfortunate that, women have been somewhat marginalized when it comes to science. So thank you for saying that. And seeing Dr. Kayla here and Christine is just wonderful. No disrespect, gentlemen, but it's just wonderful to see more women in science. And I loved Joe's presentation. One of the things I did learn is the cell communities, like actually mapping cell communities. That's different because we know teach our kids to do individual, and like seeing it, en masse is kind of interesting, and looking at the technology. And I like the idea that you're able to target a disease before it actually gets started. So for me, that was very interesting. How I would apply this, I found it interesting during Joe's presentation. I could see one of my kids when he did the messenger RNA and how the tail was, adenine and it hooking up with thymine. the first thing I could hear them saying, well, you taught us that, you know, when you're dealing with RNA, it should be uracil. So I could see them looking at tiny little details for things like that. But the possibilities, I think the kids would love. And I know I do, even though, you know, our curriculum is very tight, but I make sure that I get into cancer so that they understand it. And right now, I mean, this is really applicable looking at COVID-19, and a lot of my students, they lost family members to either pancreatic cancer or to, you know, COVID. So this has a real world feel to them. I think for me, I like the idea of, the reason why I took this, you know, PD is because I want to expose my kids. If there's an opportunity for them to learn and do something different and apply it to their lives, I'm going to take it. So that's why I'm here. And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Portia Scott-Chom, taught in Bridgeport for 24 years, middle school science teacher. I'm working on the science leadership team here. And of course, this is another reason why I'm here, is because I want to link it in. I'm working under the science director, so I can make this opportunity district-wide for high school, middle school, and any of the other students who are interested.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Lana, how are you today?
I'm good. I just actually got home. So I've been listening to you guys as I'm driving. So I'm Lana Rowan. I actually have been a teacher in New Haven for 14 years, and I used to work with Somi at Wilbur-Cross High School as a biology teacher and health science teacher. I also know Peter through New Haven as well, so I'm excited to be here and seeing what's being done. But I currently work at a K-8 environmental science school in New Haven, and I'm just interested in making sure that we're maintaining connections and partnerships with New Haven bioscience industry, as well as potentially other schools, especially maybe at the high school level, and bridging the connection between maybe middle school science into high school, like continuing that pathway to the industry from the elementary and middle school level. So
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just typing notes, but thank you, Lana. And last but certainly not least, Dr. No, how are you, sir?
Just one, please.
I'm sorry.
We say the name Dr. No only for the kids. Juan No, I am scientist, educator my whole life. Jack of all trades, master of none. As a scientist, I've been mostly in the biology, but I dabble in pretty much many different field of biology. The latest one is probably neuroscience. But I'm pretty sure I'm going to end my life tackling climate change and public health. Okay, so as an educator, I taught between middle school all the way up to medical school. And I'm currently teaching at career high school biology, and I'm trying to fill the shoes of some guy named Peter, who used to work at career high school, who set up the STEM career class, and I've been trying to fill his shoes ever since. And I'm literally like drowning in it, So thoughts about this. Science is really fascinating, leading edge stuff, especially with Leroy Hood work in it. And I keep on thinking how it can be applied toward the Allen Institute, the Brain Project. But as far as education, it's so hard that I keep on thinking that somehow, I'm beginning to visualize in my head, how would you go to Gizmo and get them to develop a simulation lab activity to take it from a real life situation all the way through the sample collection, all the way to setting up this technology, and then the analysis, the result. So for example, it could start out with maybe a doctor seeing a couple cancer patient in the clinical setting, you know, and then feed it all the way through to doing the test using this technology, and then getting the result and talking with the patient. Or a safari hunter, you know, out in jungle somewhere, you know, found a new species of elephant, if that's possible. Take different tissue, do this kind of, doing this kind of technology, and then do some analysis with it. So that's what I was thinking with it.
Or aliens. Could have an alien species. And you want
There you go.
The students would jump right on that one, right? Isn't that the newest thing? They're back to that Aliens movie that, you know, again, I'm dating myself. Excellent. I see Peter's taking notes on all this. Wow, that was amazing. And I just want to thank everyone again for Saturday morning being here. These were all really just great discussions, and your backgrounds, I think, just are perfect for what Peter and I hope to accomplish. So again, the goal of BioPath is really ultimately that that workforce that these companies need. And Joe's a small company right now, but I know this company is going to be big, and you're going to need the workforce. So, and again, from my perspective, being a scientist is a lot of fun, right? And being an engineer is a lot of fun. So ways that we can get our kids from the earliest level. So somebody had a great question to start, you know, how do we bring this to those younger kids? So I think that's a question that maybe we could brainstorm just a bit about. And I think I jumped in the chat just to say, I feel like the analogies that Joe provided, a lot of that I think is great. You know, to really bring in those analogies, things that they understand, they connect with. And then I think the other comment that folks brought up was connecting it to the everyday life, but then also connecting it with the possibilities of what the science can do to change the world. I mean, I firmly believe that a lot of the reasons why folks don't go into science, they don't go into my field of physics, is they don't realize how much it can change the world. Like a lot, Joe, can you comment about how much of the work you do is actually impacted by physics? I know most of you are biology, but just comment on that a bit. People don't realize, right? Physics is there too, engineering is, computer sciences.
Well, our CEO, Ken, is actually a chemist by training. So kind of the intersection of chemistry and physics brings you to diffusion. And diffusion is intimately related with this process, with fish, with life itself. So are the agents getting to where we want them to go? Are they going where we don't want them to go? How quickly are they getting there? How are we affecting reaction speeds by the concentration of molecules? That's one thing that we spend a lot of time talking about. We're always trying to think of new technologies too, especially how do you do 3D of this, right? If you didn't have to section the block. And then diffusion, and how does biology handle diffusion? There's vasculature that delivers blood, and those things diffuse out. And you guys know that much better than I do, but can we do something like vasculature, and how would that work? So we're constantly brainstorming things. Another place physics enters is optics. You saw when you polarized reflected light, you know, it's something I learned in an undergrad physics course I took, you know, when I was trying to switch from finance to physics. I was like, oh, what was that special Brewster angle where things, you know, are totally polarized at 67 degrees or something? I mean, that stuff actually helps you sometimes. And also optics comes into play. The NGS machines are basically very high speed fluorescent cameras. And so they are pushing up against the diffraction limit. And I touched upon that briefly, but the idea that light is a wave and has a size and a wavelength actually is directly limiting, like you were saying, Matt, limiting the technology here. And transistors can only get so small, right? They're having trouble going down to 8 nanometer, 5 nanometer process. Well, NGS machines can only get so fast because of the diffraction limit. And that affects how many colored probes you do in fluorescence in situ hybridization. You can maybe do 5, but at some point, this fact that spectrums have widths that are not 0 limits you. So it really, to me, physics touches everything. And another thing I learned from physics was data analysis. How important it is to validate what you're doing with data. And kind of in the academic protocol, we'd ask them, well, how tight did you make the clamp? Or, you know, how much liquid exactly do you put here? How much vacuum pressure do you pull with? And a lot of times they say, you make it thumb tight, or, you know, make the vacuum kind of pull on your skin of the glove, and that's tight. And we're like, well, we would like to know the value. So there's a lot of just knowing that without data, you don't really know what you're doing is an important lesson. And you can get that from anywhere, not just physics.
Yeah, so for Portia, for your, student who loves roller coasters, right? You never know what you can learn from doing that and where that's going to apply to your future. I think that's like a comment that I always tell students. And I see people with educational backgrounds that are so diverse that end up in places that you just never know. So Peter, I was giving you a chance to organize some of those questions. I had Matt's initial question about clinical relevancy, and I feel like that I find with my students too, they want to know about the connections that the science, whatever they're learning, more and more I see that as they want that motivation and that relevancy. So I think those ideas are important. Others share that or see that with their students?
Even at high school level, we ensure and make sure that, it could be applicable to real life, or else the kids are going to think, why am I learning this? So once we have that real world connection, then they can tap into it, and that creates more interest for the student.
And what I try to show them is that it's the skills you learn in doing it. I don't know, it's not necessarily a direct application, but the skills that you gain in doing whatever that project is, or that, writing is a big piece of it. Presentation is a big piece of it. I don't think students realize how important that is for what you do, right, in the field. I know when I talk to employers, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for individuals who can write well, can communicate well, right? So that's another thing I try to say to my students.
You're absolutely right. As a scientist, we tell the kids, not only, I know you love science, but you need to be able to write, communicate with the outside world about your thing. You need some math. So it's like Joe's presentation to me is multidisciplinary. It's not just focused on biology or physics, and he's baking and he is sketching and drawing cartoons. And it's like, it's amazing. It could be applicable to no matter which discipline you are trained in. Sometimes we get, pigeonholed into, oh yeah, I'm only biology teacher, physics, no way, I don't want to learn that, or something like that.
Yeah, I think one part of this too is just, the process where there's a new technology developed, academically, a lot of, in research, the problems there, you have cancer, and now you're finding a way, and you found a way to apply the new technology to a current problem. So it's not just research. You're actually applying it, using it, and solving world problems.
And the thing I wrote in the chat box about failure, I don't know if folks saw that, but I don't think the kids need to know that failure is a good thing. Sometimes you fail at something, and then at one application for a particular problem, it becomes an answer to a different one. I mean, there's so many examples in science and technology where this has happened. So I think that this talk that Joe just gave is a really great example of, I think, of areas where this technology is fitting a niche in one place, but who knows where it's going to go in other places.
Sorry.
Oh, go, please.
I just wanted to give an example of what Dr. Akila was saying about especially interdisciplinary. I know before we opened, and even after we opened, we did a lot of work with Annie Fisher in Hartford. We were kind of like a sister school with Annie Fisher. But our units, and when I say like our units, our STEM units are written to be fully integrated and interdisciplinary. So for example, right now my second graders are working in the life science unit, which is working on seed dispersal and pollination. And so we're reading about it, we're writing about it. They're currently writing lab reports. We're doing investigations, we're outside, we're exploring the school grounds for evidence of seed dispersal and pollination. So when you talk about applying it to the real world, I mean, even at the elementary level, the little ones, when we were outside yesterday, and as they're exploring and they're shaking the plants and they're watching the seeds go everywhere and they're just having a great time, at the same time, they're making those connections and saying, well, those seeds are traveling, and next spring when we come back out, this is what's going to happen. So those connections, even early on, if we can maintain those connections and keep that, I think it's just so important that when you get to do work like what Joe is doing, that foundation has been laid even at an early age. I guess that's kind of like the point is what I'm trying to make there. We're trying to lay that foundation at an early age.
Exactly.
Juan had a question, and I guess I would say maybe this is for Joe. What kind of jobs would you say that this talk is related to? And maybe we can expand it beyond necessarily, you know, who are you looking for at AtlasXomics right now? But, you know, perhaps you could touch on some of your competitors, maybe? I don't know.
Well, there's a broad range of activities and educations. And I would say the number one quality, so besides level of entry and education, the number one quality is kind of stubbornness, like Christine was saying, that it's really hard, and we're actually failing much more than we're succeeding. We're learning a lot from the failures, but it can be kind of demoralizing. Mm-hmm. If I say I have somebody helping me make chips and cut chips, and I say, well, this chip is ruined because you cut it wrong. And then they got kind of sad and said, well, don't worry, we'll make more chips, but you know, don't do it the way that you did it that time. And this person is actually an undergrad. I would say we need functioning teams, right? And it seems like the people who are really successful academically, it's not always correlated with people who are good members of teams. So it really matters more that people are working well together, that they can fight through failure and be creative and effective, whatever their education level is. Now, there's some things we're doing, like developing a new chemistry. There's so much to learn that if you have spent a couple of years doing coursework for a master's in biochemistry, that really, really helps. Like, we were trying to think of a way to look at how RNA sites get methylated. Portia, you might know a lot about this, where certain sites have a methyl group attached to them on the A. So the A in some RNA is different from other RNAs. And how could you see that in an assay? And there's ways to do that for single cells, but how do you make it spatial? So we're brainstorming that. And Ken's coming in with chemistry, with click chemistry. We have another colleague named Shira, and she has a PhD in biochemistry. And she said, well, here are 4 papers that did it. Let's combine them all into a new technique. And we're trying to think how we do that. So I think for that, there's some knowledge that if you don't have it, you need to learn it, and that can just take time. But, you know, the undergrad who's helping punch chips also read those papers and also contributed. So if someone's willing to learn quickly, I don't think there needs to be this has to be a PhD position, or this has to be a master's.
So that point about the tenacity, attention to detail, I would say, mm-hmm. You know, I think the lab skills are so key, you know, getting those over time. Yep. And realizing why they're so important, I think, is the, you know, again, I go back to this, you know, I'm sounding old and saying this generation, but, you know, understanding that there's a motivation for why you need to know it, and why lab skills are so important. Mm-hmm. The attention to detail is so important in what we do.
We had a professor at Michigan, her name was Bing Zhou, and she was a motorcycle factory leader at the age of 12 in China, and tested into their physics program because she's, you know, a brilliant person. And she was teaching electricity and magnetism and wrote something on a board, and I asked a question, and it wasn't a very good question, right? And she turned around and gave me a funny look, and she said, try to think a little. And it came out like, oh, there goes Joe, you know, never thinking. But what she really meant was think about your question and then see if you still need to ask it. And I find that when I'm teaching people, training people, they always are so eager to ask. And sometimes I have to say, well, why don't you take a 10-minute break and think about it, and then see if you still need to ask the question. And when they do that, work on their own. So I think also being self-teaching, mm-hmm. really, really important quality.
Can I ask a question in a different way?
So there was a couple people that wrote to me, and I wanted to follow up. Jackie was hoping to chime in, and then I might pick on Matt too. And then if we could come back to you, Portia, I'm sorry.
Working at Raytheon, one of the things I found, and when I heard you say, Christine, about how lab skills are essential, that, you know, the lab isn't just about the biology and the tools, but also the technology tools. I've heard that referred to several times here. And so what I'm really listening hard for, and why I was so interested in what Joe was talking about, is because I'd love to take a piece of this where a computer would need to be involved and create some sort of lab or something that would be able to help my students and help me to understand it better, because that's how I learn, is by doing. And then also maybe pass that on. I'm also the president of the Computer Science Teachers Association, pass that on via the association to try to help computer science teachers to see these connections too, to support this initiative. So I continue to listen hard and try to learn as much as I can. I was hired at Raytheon without computer science. As a female, I think I was kind of freaked out about computer science until I graduated, sadly, from UConn, or I don't know, happily, I finally got the confidence, whatever. But it's all worked out fine. But, kind of fast forward, I continue to listen, partly because of the gender inequities, I think, and also the racial inequities that we see in the computer science and also physics and all the other fields that I've been mentioning, but computer science especially, I want to do what I can. My daughter's my muse. She's 12 right now in a public school here in Connecticut, and I want things to be better for her than they were for me. And that's another big part of where this motivation comes from. And I just think as much as we can to help students understand that, information doesn't come in silos when they're working in an industry, that information comes in large, connected, amazing, interesting packets. And that's where, connections with other people, like you said, teamwork is so essential. That's where we really do make these amazing, lasting connections that are way beyond, the problem that we're solving. And I just really think this is cool and motivating, and that's it. I'm going to be quiet, but that's like, just keep listening and trying to grow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to expand on that, and from the perspective of biology, one of the things I do with my honors bio kids is I start with cancer from the big picture perspective. I think similar to what Portia was saying before, and then bring it right down to the level of data analysis, to technology, to genomics, and then they have a big context to see things, and then they can see how all of those interdisciplinary pieces kind of fit together and are necessary. And the other one that I would really mention is data analysis as a skill, because it's just such a critical part and links everything beginning in second grade. I mean, there's one of the things you can go all the way from second grade, middle school, high school, and it's going to last you forever. Something we're always all getting better at.
Thank you for sharing that, Matt. And Portia, I'm sorry I cut you off before, but please.
No problem.
Okay.
My question, now that Joe said that, I'm like, I don't know, should I ask the question?
Oh.
Thinking about what your teacher said to you, but I'm just thinking, I'm thinking of it in a different way. Like, you're at the level where you're innovating, right? What foundational knowledge or skills do you think people who are going in that area should have? Like me as a middle school teacher, I know that I'm focusing on, we do all of it, but in terms of the biology, we make sure they understand protein synthesis, they understand cell division, they understand all those foundational things that get you to understand the bigger picture, right? What is it as where you're at? What do you think young people should have the knowledge of going into the area that you are developing?
I think one super important thing is that our bodies are complicated organic systems and are constantly exuding molecules that break down other molecules, and that it's really, really easy to ruin an experiment with your body, right? So it's amazing how you take a shortcut and you think, oh, I'll just do this without a glove or something, and the RNAs from your body obliterates an entire library's worth of data. I think that is kind of a harsh lesson, that it's very easy to come up repeatedly and you get laxer and laxer, and then it ruins an experiment. I think the central dogma, how information moves through that, and then how we get information from those molecules out. Optical microscopy, I think using a microscope is central to everything we do, from making and looking at chips to comparing the results of our NGS stuff to optical imagery. I think the relationship between species, the idea that you can get information from other species, but it might be limited. I think a major controversy in cancer right now is, why is everyone doing all this mouse research? Why was all of DBIT validated on mice, a mouse embryo? It might have a lot to do with human disease, and it might not. So this idea of grafting human cells in, so I think this notion that not only are species different, but within species, there's communities of cells that are different. So I think being able to put this stuff in context is important. In terms of working in a lab, I don't think there's anything really in the lab, biology-wise, that a high school graduate couldn't do and learn pretty quickly. So I don't think we need to say, oh no, you absolutely have to go get your PhD. I think getting that lab experience first, and even during your undergraduate, as much as possible, because I think there's a lot that's unique to each lab. Learning to pipette is, when you imagine in your head somebody working at a bench, I always imagine them using a pipette. Well, it's not that hard. It's about being careful. It's not so different from a screwdriver. Let's not mystify it. So I hesitate to put a minimum bar on academic knowledge.
Thank you.
And Peter, for me to just to quickly jump in, this idea that it's not as much about content knowledge, but skills. I mean, I think I was so thrilled to, you might not all agree, but for NGSS to come out with these separate practices that really are just focusing on those, because I feel like for a lot of them to understand, we brought up data analysis as being key, communication, teamwork. I feel like a lot of these are really from early on going to help them to be in the right direction for success.
I'll just quickly echo that as someone who is involved in the NGSS writing. And I was actually part of a team of educators from Connecticut that worked with 10 other states to write the rubrics that are being used to assess some of the questions. And really what we had in mind is that if students mastered the skills, even if they weren't necessarily exposed to the content, they should be able, to achieve mastery in response to those questions. And so many of the skills that, we've talked about today are exactly the ones that, that we want the students to develop.
May I ask a quick question to Joe? Sorry, I didn't mean to put you under this big, huge focus light or whatever you call. I'm wondering if I always introduce research, especially we are in New Haven, Yale, Gateway, and Southern are in our backyards. Like if I set up Ask a Scientist type of platform for my students, and if they ask a bunch of questions, do you have, I know you're a researcher, I'm sure you're very, very busy, but do you have any time to answer their questions, or maybe come in as a guest and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but something like that where kids can ask questions.
I would love that. Yeah. That'd be wonderful. I would love that opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. And Somi, I think so much of this is also the mentoring piece, right? For them to see, just to see Joe and to see, scientists are just regular people. They're great people, right? That love what they do. And I think that, I think students themselves don't really understand and think of themselves as doing it because they don't have a realistic expectation of what it means to be a scientist. So folks that can answer questions, and also individuals that, like you've taken the time today, Joe, they can put a person to that role is so key. So Peter, go ahead.
One thing to Portia's question. I think Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Excel are key tools. 99% of our data analysis is in Excel. So I would add, and that's something you can learn, very early on. So learning how to do basic formulas in Excel, how to make things look okay in PowerPoint, and communicate your ideas. That everyone must be an expert at that from now on, I think.
And I just will jump in on that one because I think we all assume that our students can do this because they can play video games and do all the things they do, Twitter or whatever it is they do now in social media. But the undergraduates, and it's not just at my university, I talk to other universities, they can do the technology, but they might not know how to use it the way they need to use it, right, to do some of these things. So I would say that is a really good point that Joe just met. And to Juan's question about, associate's degrees, yes, I mean, I think there are jobs out there. And I think that, as Joe just mentioned, with high school backgrounds, community college backgrounds, with those skills though. I mean, I think the skills are key, the content knowledge they can get, but the skills are really key for them. Other comments, questions?
I guess another thing that it happened when I was teaching that numerical simulation course in Michigan, students are very used to using browsers and Facebook and Twitter, but they're not used, in my experience, to inputting their own content, and they're almost afraid to affect things. So we had a sample program for them with nothing but comments in it, and they asked me, is it okay to change the comments? I said, well, yes. And they were really hesitant to do anything that might affect something. So like making them feel ownership of what's going on. That was it took an entire first lab to get to that point before they could start playing and discovering that, yeah, you can make gravity point sideways, no big deal. It's just a program.